So while you have an administration that says they're super pro oil and gas, you have a lot of folks in the U.S. that are really not happy with the way things are going, and they don't want to see these dropping oil prices because it's going to make it more difficult for them to produce profitably.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Callie Pateson. Callie, President Trump spoke at the UN this week, the General Assembly meeting, and he had some things to say about the energy and environment. What did he have to say?
He did. You know, President Trump is not a big fan of climate change policies. This is a known fact. He's always downplayed the risks of climate change, and he did not hold back when speaking before the UN this week. He called climate change the greatest con job to be perpetrated on the world. And he called the idea of a carbon footprint a hoax. Now, of course, we know a carbon footprint is the total greenhouse gas emissions directly or indirectly caused by one individual, a organization, a nation, a product, and there's pretty widespread agreement that taking mitigating behaviors like lowering greenhouse gas emissions will lower our carbon footprint, help slow climate change, make it better on human health and the environment, and so it's interesting that he's described it as a hoax, and he took this opportunity to blast particularly European efforts to lower their own carbon footprint. He said that this caused them to close down factories, to lose jobs. And while at the same time we've seen other nations like China's greenhouse gas emissions increase, he kind of indicated that this was all for naught in that. So he really didn't pull back. It doesn't come as a surprise, especially as we know he pulled out of the 2016 Paris Agreement at the start of his administration again. And under this agreement, the UN member states have said that they are committed to lowering their carbon footprints by lowering emissions and taking other mitigating behaviors.
And so he's always been against a lot of these policies because he wants to see greater energy production, particularly in energy sectors that are viewed as increasing our carbon footprint, no?
Absolutely. You know, he is a big fan of oil and gas. And, you know, as he's trying to increase LNG exports and increase oil exports to Europe and to other countries, he's wanting Europe to also kind of pull back on these mitigating behaviors and these mitigating policies. His members of his cabinet, Energy Secretary Chris Wright, leading up to the General Assembly, was also encouraging the EU to pull back on some of these policies, particularly as it related to methane restrictions, because they don't want to see oil and gas producers hurt by these restrictions that would then potentially lower the chance of increasing exports to the EU.
So you mentioned that President Trump is a fan of oil and gas. He is much less so a fan of wind energy, and there was a little bit of a setback there. The revolution may be televised after all.
Yes, so we've seen throughout the entire summer the Trump administration really escalate their crackdown, their attacks on the offshore wind industry. Trump himself has said he's not going to allow for any new windmills to be built in the U.S., and we've seen them actually stop construction of a project that was 80% complete. Now this is Revolution Wind. It's based on, off the coast of Rhode Island, and it's set to produce around 700 megawatts of energy, sending it to Rhode Island and Connecticut consumers. And they have dozens of wind turbines already installed, and they were set to come online next year. And at the end of August, the Department of Interior halted construction with a stop work order saying that there were national security concerns. Now, just on Monday, a federal judge lifted that order, saying that the company Ørsted, which is a Danish offshore wind giant, was going to suffer irreparable harm from this stop work order. The company had been saying they were losing $2 million a day just from having this construction paused. And, you know, they were facing some deadlines as well in terms of purchase agreements with utilities. And so if they weren't able to finish construction and meet those deadlines at a certain time, all of that existing construction would all be for naught. So it's the first really legal win for the offshore wind industry in their fight against the Trump administration. Of course, the Trump administration has the ability to appeal, and I think given their perspective and their push on offshore wind we've seen thus far, it won't be surprising if they do so.
So some tilting at windmills there.
Yes.
Now, despite having an oil-friendly president in the White House, you've written about how oil executives feel a little bit pessimistic right now. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think, when he was in his campaign, there was a lot of hope within the oil and gas industry that the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, would really boost domestic production and support these producers out in the Permian and these other basins. However, we've seen throughout the year not a lot of people are happy with the policy decisions this administration is making. And so this week, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas released their quarterly survey among oil and gas executives. And a lot of folks are really pessimistic about the markets right now. They're really upset with the tariff situation. They're really upset, especially on products like steel, which is raising their own supply chain costs. They're upset about all of this trade uncertainty. And some of them are even really upset about this crackdown on renewables and are warning that this will come back to bite the oil and gas industry in just a couple of years, especially if it turns into a Democratic administration after that. And one of them even said, the uncertainty from the administration's policies has put a damper on all investments in the oil patch. Those who can are running for the exits. Another oil and gas exec said the U.S. shale business is broken. What was once the world's most dynamic energy engine has been gutted by political hostility and economic ignorance. So while you have an administration that says they're super pro oil and gas, you have a lot of folks in the U.S. that are really not happy with the way things are going. And they don't want to see these dropping oil prices because it's going to make it more difficult for them to produce profitably. They don't want to see international groups like OPEC just flooding the market with supply because that's also going to make it hard for them to produce more. And that's really what the administration is pushing for. So you're having a conflict of desires here from the administration and from the industry. I think there's still some hope that things will settle in the coming years, but at least for now, there's a lot of agreement that drill baby drill isn't happening.
Sure, and some of it is energy policy, some of it is obviously the Trump administration, views energy production as a big part of how it's going to lower prices, but some of it are policies that are really not directly related to that, the trade policies and how that affects the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because it's just causing uncertainty across the board, folks are just worried about investing. No one really wants to invest in a lot of new wells and exploration opportunities if they don't know where or who they could partner with in the coming years. And so, oil and gas, they love certainty. And if you have a market that is so uncertain about other sources of energy or other potential trade or tariffs on products that are related to the supply chain, they aren't going to want to pursue new opportunities.
Thank you, Callie. You can read Callie and the rest of our policy team's coverage and subscribe to our Daily on Energy newsletter at washingtonexaminer.com.